Good morning and welcome to Questions. I'm your host, Jeff Adelman. Today's going to be a little bit different than some of my other shows. Usually I have attorneys on talking about different areas of law. But today we're going to break the mold a little bit. We're going to be talking about law, but we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of law enforcement. And it is my privilege and my honor to have my good friend, Bill Gordon, on with us.
Thank you, Jeff, for having me.
Well, thank you for being here, Bill. Bill is a 30-year veteran police officer. He's a major with a South Florida Police Department. He is a military veteran and just one of the best people I know. So I'm really excited. I'm very biased to have Bill on, but we had talked about it at a dinner one night, how great it would be, and now the time has arrived.
The time is here.
So, Bill, if you could you introduce yourself to the audience and kind of tell them how you got involved in law enforcement?
Sure, Jeff. I've been a law enforcement officer here in South Florida for 30 years. It's one of those where this was something that I knew I wanted to do from an early age. In matter of fact, from the time I was 8 years old, I knew that I wanted to be a police officer, and it was because of a friend's father who was a state trooper. That because of him walking home from school one day and seeing him on the side of the road, and there was a rainstorm coming, and he had me jump into his patrol car and just listening to the radio and seeing what he was doing in the uniform. That was it. I was hooked. I knew this is what I wanted to do.
Well, and again, 30 years, that's remarkable. And you, in addition to that, you are in the Air Force Reserves?
Yes. I'm a Master Sergeant in the Air Force Reserve. Started out in the Army. Did some time in the Army. Then for those military folks out there, I realized that my ASVAB score was way too high to stay in the Army, and I switched over to the Air Force Reserve.
All right. Now, today being the anniversary of 9/11, all of us obviously were very impacted. And I mean, the effect on our country, it's immeasurable. Can you tell us what was going on with you on September 11th, 2001?
Sure, it was. It was kind of eerie. I was on military orders at the time, and I was working at U.S. Southern Command down in Miami. And we started getting intelligence alerts about something going on before it really even hit the news media. And then the first plane hit the tower, and we were in lockdown. It was bedlam. It was mayhem, as we all know. And I was contacted after about 11 a.m. after everything kind of stopped. Right. We started getting the phone calls. And my regular reserve unit down at Homestead Air Reserve Base, we were activated. We were already planning to go over, if people remember the old Operation Southern Watch and Northern Watch, the no-fly zone in Iraq. We were getting ready to go over for Southern Watch, but then September 11th threw a curveball in there. And it was very eerie. Those first few days getting loaded up and going home. And I had a young daughter at the time who is now grown up and in the Army herself. And just packing up the gear and getting ready to go and have her grabbing onto my leg, ask me, where are you going? I couldn't tell her because I didn't know. I didn't even know where I was going. But what really has stuck with me over these years is how eerily quiet it was because there was no aircraft flying. And then I had a second thought of, I wonder if this is how both my grandfathers felt when they were getting sent overseas during World War II. And not knowing what we're going to be facing, what we're going to be going to, and am I going to see my family again? Went down to the base. We loaded the C-17s, getting all our equipment. We launched our F-16s, the fighters, and we followed them over to the Middle East. And we got there very early on the 13th, and what we like to term of turning and burning our aircraft and fueling them and loading them and launching them. And it was nonstop. It was a whirlwind for the next, we're about 45 days out that we were doing just back-to-back operations.
What an insane time. I mean, there's a few moments in your life where you just remember where you were, what was going on. I mean, of recent memory, unfortunately, the Parkland tragedy.
Yes.
That kind of sticks in there. And then for me, the Challenger,
Yeah, same thing with me. I remember Challenger, and it's those seminal moments in your life that, something happens that will permanently embedded in your brain.
Yeah. Well, and again, that was early on in your career too.
Yeah, fairly early on. Yeah, it was. I started in law enforcement in 1989. I was a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed 19-year-old. Thought I was 10 foot tall and bulletproof, and I can go out there and save the world.
Well, I know you've made a difference in all the time that you have spent as an officer, and in addition to and again, that's part of the reason I wanted to have you on, to talk about some of the current issues that are going on and what you've seen in your 30-year career. In particular, one of the things we wanted to talk about today was body cameras. Body cameras are in the news as a way of keeping police honest, but at the same time, it really keeps everybody honest, doesn't it?
Yes, and the terminology of keeping the police honest. I
said that on purpose.
I know you did. But let me counteract that. Yes. Counter that, counsel. No, what I like to say, it levels the playing field. Right. And because prior to cameras and prior to video, you had to go on the word of the officer and you had to go on the word of the defendant. And that's fine. We expect people to be honest, and you raise your right hand and you swear to tell the truth in a court of law. However, everyone is human, and everyone will have their own views of what they believe happened. And so the body cameras help level the playing field. I'm not going to say that they're the end-all, be-all, because they certainly are not. I think there is an unrealistic expectation for the general public out there that body cameras are going to show everything and that it's going to be out there and it'll be irrefutable. But body cameras are, it's a 2D medium. It's going to be on the perspective of the officer, and it's not going to capture everything. It's certainly going to add to what the officers will present in court or what the prosecutor will present, and it will also help the defense to mitigate certain things because we all have our basis and our perspectives of things. Mm-hmm. However, it's going to, again, I say level the playing field. It helps both sides. So
you're very okay with it?
I'm very okay with body cameras. And I'm not saying that just because at this point in my career I'm an administrator. I was always taught in the beginning of never do anything or never say anything that you wouldn't do or say or not do if your grandmother was watching over your shoulder. And that always stuck with me because, my grandmother was, a little 4'10", Scottish German. So she ruled the roost. Mm-hmm. So there's nothing that I would want to do or say that I wouldn't do or say in front of her. Unfortunately, because of law enforcement being such an occupation or something that's out there, that the negatives tend to get magnified, probably more than necessary or realistic of what's going on. And people tend to paint law enforcement with a broad brush based on one or two interactions or different scenarios that they see. I kid with my brothers in the fire service, that they're the heroes and everybody loves a firefighter because the firefighters show up when people need help. And what people don't realize is that the majority of the interaction that people have with law enforcement is when there's something wrong in their lives, or they may find themselves in a position where they shouldn't be. And so it tends to be that more of a negative contact, sure, or potentially negative contact or neutral contact as opposed to, a positive contact of, rescuing my kitten from a tree or, pulling me out of a burning building. People tend to be very thankful for stuff like that. They don't tend to be thankful for someone being arrested.
Well, you show up and something's going on. You're right in
Yes.
the middle of it. You try to diffuse it, and then the firefighters would generally come like afterwards if somebody's hurt or anything like that. Nurturing those type of things. So it's understandable, not necessarily fair always.
No,
but you know that. You just
I understood that when I picked up the blue application instead of the red application. I kind of knew what I was getting into, so it's understandable.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that, and you and I've had the discussions where, listen, cops are human too. We deal with the same thing that other people deal with, and we have the same issues that other families deal with, and the stresses of our job compared to someone else's. It's all equal. Mm-hmm. And I think people lose sight of that because there's an expectation of how we should act in society generally, but then law enforcement is held to that higher level that you have an expectation. Hold yourself to a better standard.
Right.
And we try to achieve that. We don't always make it, which again is part of the human element, but we do our best.
Now, you, through your years with the agency, you've actually been involved with internal affairs, reviewing cases of alleged officer misconduct.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I will tell you this, that the great majority of police officers out there do a great job day to day, in and out. But as with any segment of society and professional workforce, you have your bad apples. And I can tell you with 100% confidence that no one hates a bad cop more than a good cop. It's we don't like that because we are in the public eye, and it does tarnish us, and it tarnishes our badge, and we don't want that. We want to be able to go out there and do a good job, and we, regardless of the opinions that are out there, we do investigate vigorously officer misconduct, from a simple complaint of courtesy all the way to criminal investigations and everything in between. And when officers are punished or held accountable for their actions, more than people realize, more than people think. And we police ourselves, pardon the pun, probably more than any other profession that's out there. You have the Florida Bar that does investigations, the American Medical Association that looks at doctors and or medical professionals for malpractice. But if you look at the consistency of the investigations and what is done with bad officers, and granted, some slip through the cracks, and nothing is perfect.
Right.
You will find that law enforcement, especially here in Florida with the systems that we have in place, are held to a standard and held accountable. And when they fail to meet those standards, it is dealt with, and it's dealt with swiftly.
What's it like sitting on that board, being involved with that? Is it like a panel, or is it just you get a file and you look through it and then you interview the officer? It's
there is steps that are basically set out in state law. Florida State Statute 112 outlines what will be done, and you also have Florida administrative codes that cover this, and you have your own individual department policies and procedures that deal with this. And you have to follow these, and you conduct this investigation like you would in a regular criminal investigation, except that we deal with the administrative side for violations of policy and procedure. And we follow these rules, and the officers are afforded a proper defense. They can have their counsel with them. And what we do is much like what a prosecutor will do is we gather all the evidence. We will interview all the witnesses. We will interview the person making the complaint, and then we turn over everything to the officer and their legal representative and counsel, and they have a right to review all that prior to that officer being questioned. And what we deal with in internal investigations is basically what you deal with in civil, is a preponderance of the evidence. If it was more likely than not that it happened, you meet that 51% threshold for a term to throw on there, then we find that the allegation was sustained. And you have different things that how we classify a case. It can be sustained. Yes, it did happen. Not sustained, which means I can't say that it did or did not happen. Unfounded, which means that the complaint is completely bogus. This allegation did not happen. Or exonerated, where, yes, the officer did these things. However, it's within law, it's within policy and procedure, and they were right in what they did. Now, there's also another topic that a category can fall into, and what we call that is policy failure. In other words, there was no policy or procedure in place that governed whatever happened. And then that will lead to a policy review and see if something needs to be established or something else needs to be tweaked.
I tell you, I'm going to talk to the plaintiff's bar. I'm going to have you come in and teach an evidence class. Something tells me you've been in a courtroom a few times.
I once or twice over my career. I've been in a courtroom. I've had to sit across from someone much like yourself, who puts on a smile. However, it's the wolf in the sheep's clothing.
Whatever. Yeah. You caught me. No, my smile today is genuine. But yeah, you've. I know we've talked about it. We've talked about what it's like to testify and going in front of a jury, and how it's so important to really engage with the jury. And I tell my clients that as well. And you brought it up to me. You speak directly to the jury.
Absolutely. And any of my law enforcement officers out there. One thing I think we talked about when we talked about courtroom theater, courtroom theatrics, and that's what it is. It's a play. You're presenting your side, the prosecution's presenting theirs, and who's going to come out on top, and really is how you present the facts. And I want to be clear about that, is presenting the facts.
Right.
But the jury is the people who are going to be deciding. Not the attorneys, not the judge, it's the jury. And I instruct my officers, when you are giving testimony, don't speak to the prosecutor, don't speak to the defense attorney, speak to the jury. Those are the people that you have to convince that what you did was lawful and correct, and what the person did that led up to that, based on your probable cause, would then lead to beyond a reasonable doubt.
Absolutely. Eye contact, I know you have no problem with that. I don't have a problem with that.
No, not at all.
But, there's a big difference. Like, and then I pulled the guy over. If you're looking at the jury, I pulled the guy over, and then this happened. I mean, you're telling a story. You're engaging.
Yes. What you want to do is, in giving testimony or writing a police report, anything, is you want to paint a picture. And I want to describe it in such a way, is the way that I saw it and the way that I write it down, you are going to see in your mind's eye exactly what I saw. Mm-hmm. And so you leave the ambiguity out of it, and you make it clear that, all right, A led to B, led to C, led to D, and you kind of walk the person down that path.
Absolutely. This is this type of stuff that we talk about in trial prep, advocacy, seminars. This really is the type of stuff we talk about, the storytelling, that bringing the jury, transporting them to the scene, through words. And, the fact that you're talking about it that way, I always love talking about that type of stuff, because it's not easy to do.
No, it's not. And it is something that you are not going to learn right out of the box and at the academy or the beginning of your career. It's going to develop over time. And what I try to convey to my new officers is, you want to be able to tell the story as if the person is looking right over your shoulder, and they're seeing what you're seeing, and they're experiencing what you're experiencing, and they can get that emotion. Oftentimes, I know you've seen this in court, you'll get someone who is technical, and we talk about cop talk. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to, I don't want to be that rigid. I arrived at the scene and exited my patrol cruiser and made contact with. No, you want to tell the story. You want to be able to have that jury identify with you what you saw, what you did, what you experienced, and what led you to make the arrest. And it is easier said than done.
No, it's definitely a developed skill, and I didn't expect to be talking about that with you today, but I'm glad we did, because I love that storytelling. I love, engaging and getting people to be at the area or to see it with the words.
And I guess I do want to back up, because we both mentioned at some time of telling a story. That's an easy way to say it, but it is conveying the facts and circumstances.
Yeah, but there's a big difference between looking at a checklist and explaining it with descriptive words and talking about how it happened, as opposed to somebody got shot.
Right.
Nobody's going to, somebody got shot. You have to make people actually see it.
Yes, you need to, as I like to say in some of the classes that I talk, is I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to tell you what I told you. Mm-hmm. And so that you're going to see the consistency in those statements of why you did what you did.
Let me ask you this, Bill. You, in your career, you've worked in different departments within your police department. Tell me, what areas you've worked in.
Well, of course, everybody works patrol, which is the backbone of any law enforcement agency. I worked patrol. I worked as a field training officer, training the new officers that come out of the academy. I had an opportunity to work in the traffic unit. I did DUI enforcement. I did traffic homicide investigations. I had an opportunity to work in the training bureau, where I trained or maintained the training for all the officers in the agency. Probably one of my exciting assignments was I worked what we call a street crimes unit, which are the kind of like the fire department of the police department. They handle all the emergent problems that are faced. If there's a certain issue in a certain area, then the street crimes unit will go in there, street level drug enforcement, any issues that are happening, the street crime guys will jump on that.
So you've run the gamut.
Yeah. I've done quite a bit. I certainly haven't done everything. I never worked, deep narcotics cases, or that just wasn't my thing. And then I had an opportunity to test for sergeant. And one thing that you kind of say in police work, if don't complain about something if you're not willing to try to change it. And that's what drove me to promote. And then as a sergeant, I kind of followed the same path that I did as an officer. I worked patrol, I worked traffic, I worked training, I worked street crimes, and then I worked internal affairs. I also had, at that point, worked hiring and backgrounds, which is really interesting. Mm-hmm. You're dealing in the human resources issues of hiring people or wanting to dealing with people that want to be police officers. Then was a sergeant for about 8 years, and then I promoted to lieutenant, went back to patrol as a watch commander. Mm-hmm. And I realized that at that point in my career, I was no longer getting paid for what I did. I was getting paid for what I knew, because I was on nights. I was the senior person out there. There's nobody else. So, the captains and the majors and the chiefs all went home. And then, at night when the sun went down, I was the boss. So that presented its own challenges as well. Hopped up through the ranks. I'm now currently a major and oversee all the specialized units in the police department, canine, traffic, training.
It's terrific.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful ride. It really has.
Well, I asked you about that because none of us will ever have, at least I don't know how many officers are watching or listening today, but most of the people are not. Can you kind of tell us what it's like? You pull somebody over, you don't know who they are, and what goes through your mind when that happens? Because I think that's important for people to understand that you don't know what you're getting into.
No, certainly. And it's understandable that the majority of the people that we deal with are good, honest people. They may have made a mistake, and all of a sudden, blue lights or red and blue lights are in the mirror behind them. And there is that immediate sense of anxiety or panic or, what did I do? And then the defensiveness comes in. And we've all experienced this. We've all done it. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm a good person. Okay. Well, I don't know that. Or the officer, when they put those lights on, they see a violation, or your car may match a description of somebody that we're looking for, whatever the case may be. And we put those lights on. We don't know who's in that car. We don't know who we're coming into contact with. We don't have the crystal ball. So we make the stop, and as we make the approach, and officers are going to be cautious, and because we're walking in, and again, here in South Florida with the heat that we have, there's a lot of dark tinted windows out there that we can't see through during the day, much less at night. So when you see officers come up and they're shining the flashlight, you think they're shining it in your eyes. That is a tactic we use for our benefit, our advantage. But really, we don't know what we're walking into. There's a term out there that the media uses or people use. It's just a routine traffic stop. And I want to dispel that, because there's nothing in law enforcement that we do that is routine. It is unknown. We don't know what we're getting into when we walk into that situation. We don't know who we're going to be confronting or who we're going to be dealing with. And I will say this is when people get pulled over, there's a great majority of the time the officers made the decision within the first 10 seconds of contact of whether they're going to write a citation or not. So really how a person presents themselves is going to dictate, how the officer is going to react. If they're calm and respectful, the officer is going to be calm and respectful. Are there going to be situations out there where the officers don't act that way? Absolutely. We're all human. And I think we established that earlier in the show here, that there are going to be those,
yep.
but there are going to be those people out there that are, or officers out there that are not that way. But you don't know what they just came off of, what they just dealt with. And something, you may have done something in front of them that now they're reacting to, and they have an obligation to stop and address. And they're still hyped up from whatever it was. And I'm not using that as an excuse. I'm merely saying that we're human just like everybody else. But we don't know what we're getting into. So again, is I've heard many defense attorneys say, listen, put down your windows, put your hands on the steering wheel, say hi, and that'll go a long way.
I think you just brought up a really good point. You don't know what the officer just came from or just dealt with.
Right.
And sometimes could come across as gruff or maybe too stern. But at the same time, I think everybody kind of has to take a step back when that happens. It's necessary to have officers pull people over for traffic violations. We all know it. And to escalate it is really, it's bad for the person. It's bad for the officer.
Yes, it is. And I do advocate that to my officers. If you're coming off something that you're dealing with an emotional issue, or, you just went to a burglary in progress or a robbery in progress, and it was a hyped up call. Take that minute, sit in your cruiser, calm down, bring yourself back down a little bit, because you never want to let your emotions override your intelligence. And that's on both sides of what we're dealing with. And so again, with officers being human, we are subject to our own faults. And so I don't want the officers to put themselves in that situation. But I also ask that the public understand that, hey, we see things and do things that society themselves don't want to do or don't want to deal with. And so we go out there and do it. So there has to be give and take on both sides. And I think that, again, that law enforcement being held to that higher level, sometimes the officers don't have the opportunity to be able to back down or calm down from what they've dealt with.
What's being done these days in law enforcement to deal with that, to deal with the stress that officers are under, the mental health issues that can occur from constant stress and dealing with trauma, dealing with combative situations? is more being done these days to offer services to officers by the departments?
Yes, there's certainly more being done and more being offered than when I first started 30 years ago. I was told, the first critical incident that I went to, it's, hey kid, put this in a box, stick it on a shelf, and you can deal with it some other time. Bottle it up, put it away. That's we need to be strong. We have to be able to continue to go out there and do that job. And you see the erosion that it has, and the suicide rates among law enforcement officers and first responders, whether it be law enforcement, fire, corrections, dispatchers, EMTs, all these folks that are out there responding and dealing with the horrible mess that we as humans can sometimes make, and having to go in there and fix it, or at least stabilize it until it can be done. And I like to give a lot of credit to my dispatchers, because everybody else, we're right there face to face. They're there over a phone or over a radio.
Right.
And that that mental trauma that they have to deal with can be horrendous. Nowadays, a lot of organizations have a EAP, Early Assistance Program, where it is confidential. We do talk about critical incidents and things like that. When now we have crisis debriefings, we'll bring the officers in, we'll bring the firefighters in, we'll sit down and we'll talk about what we went through. We will offer counseling. I have an obligation as a supervisor and as an administrator that if we have an officer that's involved in a critical incident, whatever that critical incident may be, is to pull them aside. Hey, are you okay?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we're type A personalities and oh yeah, I'm fine. But I'm obligated, both legally and morally, that, you know what, you think you're okay. I don't think you're okay. I think, and get them to the help that they need. We have gyms in our police departments now. You guys and gals can go in there and work out and burn off that stress during the shift. You see a lot of agencies now that are in different departments and governmental agencies they have yoga classes, they have stress relief classes. It's, so it's out there. We're starting to see a shift in the culture, but you still have, some of the dinosaurs like me that are out there that, I'm not too sure about the downward dog, how that's going to help me. But we see it being embraced more.
I would like to see that.
I don't think you would.
I don't think you would, Jeff. That's what we're going to do. Bill's going to teach yoga for the next interview. But in all seriousness, some of the younger officers, they see that you're talking about it, seeing, knowing your experience, knowing what you've seen, everything else. That makes a huge impact.
It does. And I took that. I took that card from the military, in that we had a good friend of mine was a first sergeant, and he was deployed over with his unit in combat. And he always preached about, look, go talk to somebody, go have counseling, go deal with this. And once a week, he would go over to mental health, and he would sit down and talk with a counselor, and he would talk about different things. And finally, after a couple sessions, the counselor asked him, "So what's bothering you?" "Nothing's bothering me. I'm fine." "Well, then why do you come here?" "Because I want my guys to see that I come here and that it's okay." And
so important.
Yes,
to get rid of that stigma.
Absolutely. If anybody in that's a first responder that's dealing with these issues, it's going to impact you whether you realize it or not. And it's you go to a doctor for a checkup. There's nothing wrong with going to a doctor for a mental health checkup. Mm-hmm. Listen, you may not be experiencing something, but you have other factors that you're dealing with. Whether it be you're a brand new officer, it's the first time that you're working night shift, and you're trying to adapt to, sleeping during the day, and that's going to cause a stressor. So get out there, talk about it, deal with it. It doesn't make you weak or a less of a person to deal with it. If you go to a doctor for the flu or for the cold, there's no reason why you can't go sit down and talk to somebody about, hey, you know what, I had to see something or deal with something. You know what, it was really screwed up.
And sometimes just vocalizing it and speaking with another person, it can not eliminate it from your mind, but take some of that sting.
Yes, and it's
away.
The mental health professionals.
Clarity,
they'll give you ways of being able to structure it in such a way for you to understand what you dealt with and what you did and why you did or didn't do whatever it was out on that particular incident.
Well, Bill, I've had a great time today. This has been a terrific interview, and I've really learned a lot from you.
I really appreciate you having me on.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed it as well. I hope to see you in a month at a Panthers game or something like that.
I was going to say
that's where I usually see you.
Yes, yes.
But again, I can't thank you enough for sharing your views with my audience, and I think it's a really important conversation to have.
Oh, absolutely. And I greatly appreciate you having me on here and being able to talk about this. And there's so much more that we can discuss, and I would love to come back. And
we will do this again. Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. This has been Major Bill Gordon, my guest, 30-year veteran law enforcement. I'm personal injury attorney Jeff Adelman. We'll see you next week. Thank you for watching.